It's time for our weekly meta report for Pokemon Pocket. In the last week, we had almost 2,800 competitors participate in over half a dozen events, the largest of which had over 1,100 people battling it out. This gave us 173 top performing deck lists to go ahead and break down. Let's dive on into some juicy metrics and talk about what's working, what's not, and why. Let's kick things off with some week over week comparisons. Pikachu EX predictably grew its starting metagame share from last week after it had a completely dominating performance, going from 23% of our starting metagame last week to over 30% of our starting metagame this week. Mewtwo remained relatively steady, hanging out at around 24% week to week, and Charizard predictably saw a decrease in its metagame share as it has an abysmal Pikachu EX matchup, shrinking from around 10% last week to just under 7% this week. Looking to performance metrics this week, we see a story very similar to last week, with the Pikachu EX variations being head and shoulders above the rest of the field. They converted their 30% of the field to start to over 53% of our deck lists that were top finishers in this week's tournaments. Mewtwo remained relatively flat, going from a 24% starting rate to about a 21% top finisher. Charizard continuing to underperform as Pikachu increases in popularity, having a 7% of the field starting and only a 3.5% of our top finishing deck lists. Our others category once again getting completely dumpstered this week as people try to find their footing with off-meta things, being 39% of the starting field and only 23% of our top finishers. As we dig into some of the details around the top performing decks in this metagame, some trends start to occur. The first is that the most common and popular Pikachu EX variations are ones playing 2 copies of EX Zapdos as well. The other supporting cast past the Big Bird varies a good bit. Blitzel with Zebstrika is very common, such as in the sample deck list that won the 1,100 player Pokemon Pocket tournament hosted by Ursi Day. However, there are other people playing things like Electrode in that slot as well. If you're someone who's looking to gain an edge in Pikachu EX mirror matches, matchup data that we have from our tournaments this week implies that the Lieutenant Surge Raichu variation of Pikachu EX has a very strong performance against the typical, more popular list that we covered a moment ago. I would assume this is because once your Pikachu EX takes a hit, you can retreat it back with an X speed, keeping the energies on it, and then Lieutenant Surge can move those into a Raichu whose 140 damage attack is able to clear absolutely anything inside of an opposing Pikachu EX deck. On the Mewtwo EX side of things, it is noteworthy that a majority of the successful deck lists in this archetype this week are choosing to play 5 or sometimes even 6 basic Pokemon, as opposed to being greedy by only playing the Gardevoir and Mewtwo EX lines. Jinx is common, like in this sample deck list that took second in the 1,100 player Pokemon Pocket tournament, but other cards that are being played and finding success as 5th and 6th basics include Kangaskhan, Meowth, and even Farfetch'd for extra basics that can give you some utility while you get your endgame engine set up. Next, I'd like to highlight some fighting type decks that are looking to explicitly take advantage of the fact that Pikachu EX is almost a third of the decks being registered in these tournaments. I'd like to start by calling out something that has explicitly not been successful, and that is the Primeape fighting decks. Many people, myself included, were very excited when Promo Mankey came onto the scene via the Lapras event, thinking that this could be a tool to help us have counterplay into the powerful performance that Pikachu EX decks put up during the first week after Pocket's launch. That being said, looking at how the tournament rounds are playing out and the matchup tables inside of these tournaments, it looks like Primeape, when paired with both Marowak and Sandslash, is coming up quite a bit short, including in the Pikachu EX matchup. I would assume this is simply because the low HP pool that this promo Mankey has once it deals damage to itself leaves it very susceptible to counterplay. That being said, Marowak EX plus Sandslash has been showing promise as potentially having a strong Pikachu EX matchup while also not being particularly soft into the rest of the field. I think this deck list in particular is especially powerful when you get that going second energy first advantage. Both Marowak EX and Sandslash hit exceptionally hard when you get to evolve into them on your second turn and attack with them right away. Sandshrew into Sandslash lines up particularly well into Pikachu EX because its fighting weakness means that Sandslash deals 30 for 1 energy, and then Sandslash deals a follow-up 90 for 2 energy, clearing out EX Pikachu's 120 total HP pool very cleanly if your opponent chooses to lead on it in the matchup. Machamp EX is another Pokemon that put up some results in this week's tournament that has promise as a potential Pikachu counter. This particular deck list featuring Marowak EX as a secondary line is my favorite from among the successful decks. It does especially want to go second, similar to the Marowak Sandslash deck that we looked at, but if you go second and you get to that Machamp EX on curve, it's a force to be reckoned with that clears out even type advantage matchups like Mewtwo thanks to its high consistent damage and its bulky HP pool when paired with things like Potion. Moving on to non-fighting anti-meta picks, we kick things off with Executor Victory Bell. This combination seems especially potent into Pikachu EX because Executor EX's high health pool in tandem with Erica gives you a lot of survivability to deal out a ton of starting damage, and then Victory Bell as a follow-up has a potent Pokemon ability that gets to work around one of Pikachu's greatest strengths, which is they could typically retreat their damaged Pokemon to safety, meaning you can never knock them out. Being able to grab their Zapdos EX or Pikachu EX that's sitting on the bench with a low health pool and get those guaranteed 2 knockout points makes a lot of games deterministic for you that would typically be out of reach for any other deck in the format. Up next, we have a sweet take on Moltres featuring Arcanine EX. I really like this innovation from the Fire Ramp deck space, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised to see this become the premier fire deck in our format moving forward. Arcanine EX has a pretty solid stat line in the Pikachu EX matchup, not getting knocked out in one hit from the deck's namesake, and more importantly, Inferno Onrush dealing 120 damage means you knock out absolutely anything the Pikachu EX deck can put up in a single hit, other than Zapdos, which the 2 copies of Giovanni in this deck can push the Arcanine up to 130 points of damage to clear out. I also absolutely love the inclusion of a Singleton Old Amber and Aerodactyl in this deck because the one kind of thing Arcanine EX gives up over the Charizard that this deck typically plays is that you're going to be more vulnerable into decks that make a single big Pokemon like a Venusaur or an Alakazam or other stage 2 Pokemon, and Aerodactyl's coin flip ability can clean one of those out, shoring up that weakness very nicely. Up next, we have a variation of Pidgeotto Arbok, which is featuring a Singleton copy of Coughing and Wheezing. I think Pidgeotto in general is a very powerful stage 2 Pokemon. We can get it online with a pretty efficient attack, and I had not seen variations choosing to play a third evolution line that was 1/1 like this in the past. I think Wheezing and Arbok in particular are fantastic Pokemon into Pikachu EX because of their tanky health pools, and Arbok's corner ability can lock those EX Pokemon in that matchup so they can't retreat to safety, denying you those precious knockout points. Finally, we had an adorable showing for our latest EX card released in the promo event, EX Lapras, being paired with a copy of Seeking as a secondary Pokemon line. I like the theory behind this deck. You can have those Lapras EX early high rolls with Misty, but in the games where your Misty flips tails or doesn't show up early enough, you can lead Goldeen into Seeking to have a kind of tanky frontline Pokemon that does an all right amount of damage. While 80 all or nothing has a little bit of variance baked into it, if you squint, this is an expected damage of 40 for a single energy, which is on rate with other things like Rapidash or non-EX Marowak that I think are very playable cards inside of other colors, and I think Seeking is potentially very reasonable as far as Stage 1 water Pokemon go. To address the title topic of this video, i.e. the Pikachu problem, as we wrap up today, well, obviously there's a non-zero chance that it could be solved organically with innovations in fighting decks or Victory Bell or Arcanine EX. I wouldn't be surprised if longer term the game and format would be in a healthier spot if Pikachu EX received at least a small nerf. In my experience trying to brew decks against Pikachu EX, I think one of the biggest hurdles to overcome is the fact that Pikachu EX's 90-point attack can easily be kicked up to 100 with Giovanni, meaning cards like Kangaskhan and Marowak non-EX and Rapidash are all vulnerable to being knocked out in a single hit. Personally, I would love it if they would cap its damage at 80 at the most. Perhaps you have it do a base 20 and then scale 20 for each bench Pokemon would give a lot more counterplay to this archetype, while also leaving it able to clear things like Mewtwo EX and other powerful things in just 2 hits still. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you think you would like to see an adjustment to Pikachu EX or something else in its deck? Or do you think we should wait and see if more organic counters can show up like we've seen in some of the high potential lists that we highlighted here today? As always, thanks for making it through the end of the video. If you enjoyed my breakdown, be sure to smash that like button. If you're not familiar with me and my channel, welcome. My name's Jeff Hoagland. In a former life, I'm a data scientist with a graduate degree and undergraduate degree in mathematics, but I spent the last decade here on the internet covering different card games, Magic the Gathering, Legends of Runeterra, Marvel Snap, and now Pokemon Pocket. If you enjoy data-driven breakdowns, deck innovations, and all sorts of other fantastic roundups for this game, make sure you subscribe to this channel and stop by again at some point in the future. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you're at in the world, and may your next pack be an excellent one.